Mayo Experience Week 9 DraftKings picks and preview. We're going to be running through the entire main slate, Millionaire Maker slate for Sunday, so no primetime games in there. So don't worry about those ones. We're not talking about them here. If you want my updated cheat sheet, go to DKPlaybook.com. If you want some primetime slate coverage, also go to DKPlaybook.com. Plenty of content up there for you to consume if that's where you want to lean. Joining me from DailyRoto.com, one of the co-founders. We had one of the co-founders on 2 weeks ago, and now we have the other co-founder, Mike Leone, repping the Pat Mayo Experience by wearing his purple shirt. What's up?
That's right, repping Pat Mayo Experience purple shirt, repping the Queen City of Charlotte, where my sister lives. Not too much going on. Exciting Bills trade yesterday.
Yes.
So I'm getting pumped.
Well,
this is a weird feeling as a Bills fan that like we actually have a chance to make the playoffs, even though the season's not halfway done.
I was gonna say you have no chance, but we'll get to that when we talk about Benjamin. First of all, you've had a nice run in basketball recently. I mean, it's not quite Smiz's run, but you're having quite a good run too. So hype up the Daily Roto product.
Yeah, it's been a really fun run of basketball. Glenn, who writes for us, has had a really good run too. Our projections are doing well, and if you go to dailyroto.com/premium, we've got projections every day that me, Drew Dinkmeyer, Glenn, Scott Malwig, Chris Pacheco, we're working on them all day long, constantly updating them with news. You'll get lineup alerts, and I think they're some of the best projections out there, and we've had success with them. So give us a try. We've got weekly packages if you want to see what it's about. We've also got a podcast, written content, and all that jazz to help you win some dough.
And you got the same for football too, obviously.
Yep, football, same thing. And other cool thing with both football and basketball is there's a customizable aspect to our projections. So if you don't agree with how many minutes we're projecting a guy or how many targets we're projecting a guy, you can very easily change that yourself, and boom, like automatically, immediately, instantaneously, you're going to get a correct, accurate projection based on your changes.
All right, and if you do want to check out some fantasy golf on DraftKings, because golf is back in full swing, it's no longer in Asia, so it doesn't start at like 7 p.m. Wednesdays. We're back at like 10 a.m. on Thursdays. Normal golf time stuff here for lock, so you can go to fantasynational.com. Has everything that you need to make your selections for the week. But we're here to talk about football. I want to talk to you about the Kelvin Benjamin trade very quickly because Jake and I weren't able to get to it because it happened after we finished filming yesterday. You're a big Bills guy, but I kind of have the belief that Kelvin Benjamin's either going to be the same or worse than he was in Carolina, just playing in this low-volume Bills offense. And coincidentally, I think that Devin Funchess actually gets a really big bump here, at least until Greg Olsen comes back, and probably even through that. Like, if I could trade Benjamin for Funchess right now, I would.
Oh, in a heartbeat. I completely agree with everything that you've said. Funchess is going to get so many targets in a higher volume pass offense than the Bills. The Bills are such a low volume passing attack, and they really spread it around. They don't target the wide receiver position a ton. So I just don't see the upside with Benjamin. He's going to have some games where he finds the end zone, and it's going to be great. But, when's the last time a Bills receiver had more than 3 or 4 catches in a single game? And it's just another body to spread out. At some point, Charles Clay will be back. So I'm excited as a Bills fan because our receiver position was so dire. Zay Jones has been a disappointment. I like Jordan Matthews out of the slot. There's not a whole ton there, though, beyond that. And they needed to make a move, I think, in order to make this playoff push. There are some concerns as well in terms of fit because the Bills have receivers that don't really separate. And Tyrod Taylor's strength is more hitting guys that are open down the field, and that doesn't match up with Benjamin, but I think overall it's still a good move for the Bills to get that big red zone threat, a guy that Tyrod can hit. Hopefully, even when he's covered, he's not covered because of his size.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it when you brought up that he's going to have games where he scores a touchdown or multiple touchdowns that's going to make him seem really good. Like, I don't think he's a disaster in Buffalo, but I think that his baseline is just going to be up and down every single week. Like, the floor isn't his floor wasn't great anyway in Carolina just because he's a very capricious wide receiver, but now it's going to be even worse if the Bills get up in a game and all they decide to do is run. I think it's a much better real-life move than it is a fantasy move for Benjamin's prospects.
Yeah, you're going to see some 4 for 40 games, 3 for 40 games that are just normal games for him now with Buffalo. And it's going to leave you feeling like, where's the upside? I think that's the problem. Because even when you throw a touchdown on top of those games, it's not like a spectacular stat line. It's not going to be a huge fantasy day. So I think the floor ceiling combination is not great for fantasy.
As I advised in my waiver wire column up on DKPlaybook.com, that the perceived notion here, maybe it's not, maybe it's sort of common now that maybe this is either a lateral move or something that's worse, but I think some people do perceive this. Wow, Benjamin's the number one. There's no other receivers in Buffalo. He's going to be really good. I think if you have Benjamin right now, like, just go test the market and see what you can get for him, because I don't think that his value will ever be higher.
Yeah, the big thing you have to do is break down, what percentage of targets is a guy going to get? How often does the team throw the ball? When you start breaking it down, his targets aren't really changing that much moving from Carolina to Buffalo. So the whole, he's the wide receiver 1 instead of wide receiver 2 thing doesn't really mean a whole lot. Whereas Funchess, you start looking at a guy who is getting close to that 25% marker of market share targets that we like, and now you add on probably a much higher market share of receiving touchdowns because he's a huge body. Benjamin was a huge body. They could go to either one. Now it's mostly going to be Devin Funchess. I think his ceiling gets a big rise, whereas his median projection probably stays similar, but the ceiling is big because he's someone who can put up now some 8-catch, 100-yard, 2-touchdown games. I just don't see Benjamin having, just because it's not within the nature of the Bills' offense.
One note for Kelvin Benjamin, he is listed in the DraftKings system for the Week 9 main slate, but he is ineligible to score points, so unless you're playing me in a head-to-head, don't use Kelvin Benjamin. It's super easy like that. And there's another guy that we're not going to know as of this recording whether or not he's going to play or not. The answer is probably not. It's Ezekiel Elliott. He leads the running backs at the very top when it comes to pricing against Kansas City. He is $9,000, but his second appeal is going to go through Wednesday night. Obviously, we're recording this Wednesday afternoon, so we're not going to know. You think he's not coming back, right? This can't happen to me again after I picked up McFadden for the third time.
I took way too many Darren McFadden shares in best ball drafts in the offseason, just thinking I'd get those free 6 weeks of some RB1 production. Now, who even knows if we're going to get RB1 production, even if Zeke's out. But, I don't think he's going to play. The good thing is we'll definitely know by Sunday, so it's not going to be an uncertain situation. But I like that more for, instead of the backup running backs like Morris and McFadden, I like it more for the upside with Dak and Dez Bryant in the passing game. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I know Dez is only 6,400 this week.
Well, is there any running backs, before we get into the entire pricing, that you think you can pay down for this week and get away with in cash games?
I think maybe, I don't know if you count Carlos Hyde at 5,200.
I do, actually, because that's one of the ones that I was looking at him. I was looking at Buck Allen at $4,300, and I was looking, strangely enough, at Thomas Rawls at $3,300. That's so cheap. He played 41 snaps last week.
I know, but the carry distribution, right, still pretty even with him and Lacey. It's both crappy. They're scoring through the air when they're scoring touchdowns. I think that's like a GPP flyer. I wouldn't do it in cash games. You don't have any sort of PPR floor there. But I like Hyde. I was just looking at his recent targets. I think he's around 15% market share targets the last 3 or 4 weeks. He's been getting a high floor there in the passing game. And now you've got him at a price. I know Breda's come in. He's played a little bit. But Hyde's still pretty clearly on the positive side of that share, getting over half of the carries. So I like the upside combination for him between the pass catching and still getting the majority of the carries. Price is just right.
Yeah, the price is right, and there's not a whole lot of running back relief this week if you're going to pay down.
No, there's not. I like Javorius Allen as well. He's in our first run of projections on Daily Roto. He's in the top 5 values. I'm excited for Danny Woodhead coming back at some point for my season-long teams.
Hey, listen, I am a big fan of just using Danny Woodhead every week in cash games because he's going to end up with 7 receptions a week.
It's crazy. He came out that first game. I know we're getting off tangent, but he had 3 catches right away. I was like, all right, this is 0 RB gold right here, drafting Danny Woodhead in the 6th round, and then, poof, injury. Not that we should be that surprised with Woodhead, but the floor for Javorius Allen, because of the work in the passing game, is strong. The game against Minnesota 2 weeks ago, he had 11 targets. That's just absurd. So I think you're looking at 3 or 4 targets safely, but there's a lot of upside beyond that, depending on how the game script turns out.
Well, and even if with Baltimore last Thursday night against Miami, everyone's kind of hyping up Alex Collins. Alex Collins looked really good. He's averaging 6 yards per carry. And listen, there's nothing I can say against that. He did look really good. He is averaging 6 yards a carry. However, when you look at the snap distribution, he only played 1 more snap than Buck Allen did in a blowout game, and he only got one more carry. It was 18 carries to 17 carries. So if this isn't a massive blowout for Baltimore, which it probably isn't going to be, then I'd expect Buck Allen to play like 60-65% of the snaps.
Yeah, and as we were saying, when you look at some of the other cheap running backs, there's just nothing there. Nothing that's safe. Like, you got the New York Giants running back split, but I don't think you really want to mess with that. Same thing with the Seattle split.
Marlon Mack, really maybe?
What's that?
Marlon Mack, maybe? He's only 4,100. I think he'll get work in the receiving game.
Yeah, and even then, I like that more as a tournament player because I think like you don't have the same rushing equity that I think you just mentioned that you're going to get with Javorius Allen, and I think that's like the big difference between the two from a floor perspective. From a ceiling perspective, I like Mack's athleticism a lot. I think he's got more playmaking ability, and if they're 14-point underdogs in this game at Houston. If that goes the way it's supposed to be, you could see an awful lot of him in the passing in the second half. So I like that for tournaments. But cash games, I'm just having a tough time trusting anybody. Javorius Allen's where I'd sort of cut it off. And even there, I think I'd try to stick with Carlos Hyde or more expensive.
What about the Eagles' backfield? Obviously, Jay Ajayi being traded, he is not going to be a part of this slate, so you cannot use him. But do you think that he just comes in and he's fully integrated into this offense? Because I think that with the Broncos' pass rush being so good, that he's going to play. I mean, at least I think he's going to play because running backs can make a pretty seamless transition if they're only running the ball. It's pass protection that I worry about with Ajayi. Not that he's a bad pass blocker, it's just he needs to learn their system. They don't have a left tackle anymore. Denver's ferocious pass rush is going to get at them. Like, they want to keep Wentz upright. That's sort of the key to their success here. So I'm wondering if there's any other Eagles running back that you could see kind of sneaking into this game and playing a ton of snaps.
I just don't see it. I mean, there's just too many. I mean, they just traded for Ajayi. I can't imagine he's not going to see a decent amount of the field, even with those concerns. They said Blunt is still going to start. It's just kind of a mess there. I know Clement last week played a lot. I'd expect, one of Clement or Smallwood to probably be inactive, but there's a chance they carry 4 running backs on the active roster, and I just don't want to have anything to do with this situation. I don't think there's meaningful upside for anybody just because there's not enough to go around. If you catch the guy that maybe you run into the correct guy that gets all the dump downs, because we know against Denver sometimes that happens where they're so good on the outside that you get these small dump downs to running backs throughout the game, and you get 3 or 4 of those in a row. It can happen. Crazy, like DeAndre Washington last week. I was at the Bills game. Speaking of running back dump downs, he caught like 5 dump off passes when they were down 30 at the final drive. Like, you can't predict things like that though, and I think you would have to be able to predict something like that to use a Philly running back, and I don't see it happening.
All right, let's switch back up to the top. Obviously, no Zeke, so Kareem Hunt is the most expensive running back in that same game. He's $8,600. Then you have Leonard Fournette at 8.4, Gurley at 8.1. Then Ingram, and he's the only running back in the $7,000 area. He should just be priced 666 every single week. At least if I was doing the pricing, that'd be his price. I guess people would love that. Not me so much. Devonta Freeman at 6.6, McCaffrey at 6.5, Kamara 6.3, Lamar Miller at 6.2, and Chris Thompson at $6,100. If you're going to the top, where are you looking? Because I kind of like McCaffrey here, because the narrative around the Falcons is they can't really stop pass-catching running backs. That's all he's doing. And now there are targets to be spread around a little bit more without Benjamin around. So maybe he inherits 1 or 2 more a game, and then you're looking at double-digit targets.
Yeah, it's a definite funnel defense with Atlanta. We've seen it last year. We've seen it so far this year. The target inflation for opposing running backs is a very real thing there. So you do have to like McCaffrey's floor in that sense. He's just had a tough time being efficient and struggling in the rushing portion of the game that hasn't given him quite this huge ceiling where we haven't seen the combination of him doing both that we hope to see. So I think he's safe, but I'm also skeptical, like how many more targets can a running back really get in that offense? Even with Benjamin out. I don't know how many more targets that Christian McCaffrey can pick up there. So if I'm spending up, it's going to be for the devil player, Mark Ingram.
Please.
I know you're not happy. You hate Mark Ingram, but bottom line is you've got a 29 team total for New Orleans. They're home versus Tampa Bay, 7.5-point favorites. It's a good spread. Their defense, with Marshawn Lattimore playing real well at cornerback, has changed the complexion of this team quite a bit. And if you look at their run-pass stuff on the season, they're only at a 57 pass percentage. In the last 3 weeks, it's been pretty much 50-50 because they're able to get into these game scripts. So I think you've got a good game script, a high team total, you've got good touchdown equity in the rushing game. And on top of that, even if the game script goes bad, I mean, obviously they have Alvin Kamara there, but they're finding ways to throw the ball to Kamara and Ingram. They're both around a 15% market share of targets the last 4 weeks or so, which is really high to have two running backs there. And I think the floor ceiling combination is great. He looks to be a great cash game building block to me.
Okay, for GPP purposes, like the very, very top guys are going to be tough to squeeze in because you can't really pay down at running back. You're going to have to save money elsewhere. And I think that a lot of people will be wanting to pay up for DeAndre Hopkins, even at his exorbitant price. But like people are like soured on Kareem Hunt for some reason. I don't exactly know why. He didn't get to 100 total yards for the first time all season. Now basically the narrative is that he sucks. This might be a really good spot to use him against Dallas.
And Dallas is 30th in Football Outsiders rush defense DVOA. You take Ezekiel Elliott out there, and some of the projection systems, ours included, might be shorting the Kansas City number of plays run, which obviously funnels down to the total opportunities for everyone on the team, because I don't think you're going to be able to have that ball control type offense that they run with Ezekiel Elliott. And if they're more pass heavy, they could get caught up in a quicker pace, or they could have more 3-and-outs. The clock's going to stop more often. So I think that's a great play for tournaments. From a per dollar value, honestly, we still have him and Mark Ingram really close. It's just with the pricing be a little bit tighter, not being able to go cheap. If I had to pick one for cash games, I'm going to take Ingram at a cheaper cost and the same per dollar value. But as far as tournaments go, I think the upside for Hunt is pretty similar, not quite as much upside in terms of pure quantity of catches, but you've got more efficiency upside. We've seen that all season long out of him.
What about Fournette and Gurley? They're just kind of in this dead zone where they're expensive. Fournette, we haven't seen him since the ankle injury, and I presume he's fine, but you never know. And with Gurley, it just seems like a really big game or just kind of a game, but he's been pretty good all season long, and people don't really seem to like to use him.
I've been fading Fournette, and it's hurt, but I think that's the right move when you look at how much of his fantasy equity has come through a few really long touchdown runs. And it just seems like each week the stars are aligning for him to do exactly what he needs to do. And I think one of these weeks we're really going to see him falter. So I'm on the fade side of Fournette. Gurley is more interesting to me because I'd be surprised if up top, even with people not talking about Hunt, I still think he'll be more popular than Gurley. Him and Ingram, I'd be surprised if they weren't the highest owned of these expensive running backs. You throw in Gurley, who has shown games of just being involved everywhere and being that huge workhorse. Like, we've seen games where when it's close, he's had every single running back touch for the Rams. There has been no running back up getting touches. And when you look at like a guy like Melvin Gordon as a comparison, he's had some really inefficient games, Melvin Gordon, where he just dominates the running back touches. And as a result, he has these huge fantasy days. And I think Todd Gurley has that similar type upside that we've seen from Gordon the last few weeks. So I do like him as a contrarian tournament play just because of the diversified usage.
Yeah, I think if I'm going to go up to that level, I'm just going to go with Hunt and just try to go really heavy on him. And Gurley would be my second choice over Fournette, just because I like the way that his base kind of gets established in the receiving game as well, where they actually kind of throw routes to him and really design passing plays to Gurley, where with Fournette, it just seems like they're just literally dumping it off to him.
Yeah, and I think when I'm looking at some of these other upper tier running backs, once we move past those guys, I like going down to Lamar Miller in the mid tier.
Would you go? I know you like Ingram. Would you go Miller? Or would you go Kamara? Because I like both of them, but I kind of like Kamara.
I think if you're making an argument for one of these guys in cash games, it's got to be Lamar Miller. You've got the huge team total of 32, 14-point spread there at home versus the Colts. I know the Colts' run defense has been improved this season, but it's more about the quality of opportunities that you're going to get for a team that's going to score. Whereas Kamara, there's just a little more uncertainty in the touchdown equity for him, so I side there. And really, even in tournaments, I think I like Lamar Miller better. If you're making the case in tournaments for Kamara, it's the PPR format where he's getting full point per catches and he's going to catch more balls than Lamar Miller, and it's that you're going to get him at lower ownership. People are going to play Ingram. People are going to play Lamar Miller with that huge team total. So you are going to get leverage in terms of ownership there, and you do have, I think, more of a ceiling than people think with Kamara because we saw it last week. He can score a rushing touchdown still, even with Ingram there, and he's got 6 to 8 catch upside. But still, even with all that said, the touchdown equity for me with Lamar Miller is just too high to pass up on if you're comparing these two directly.
Chris Thompson, Doug Martin, and Adrian Peterson, 61 to 5,600. I hate Adrian Peterson, but this is a spot where Arizona, sure, they're on the road, but they are favored in this game very slightly. And if they do get up in this game with a backup quarterback against a bad defense, that Peterson might end up with 25 touches here.
And that's the big thing with AP. I hate him too. I really thought he was going to be a huge bust when that trade happened, and I wrote about it. And then he runs for 125 and 2 touchdowns the very first week. And then I think it was the London game versus the Rams where they struggled a bunch, and he had a horrible game. So you're going to get some extreme volatility this season with Adrian Peterson, and there's more of a ceiling, admittedly, than I initially thought. But if you look back at his game-to-game efficiency the last couple of seasons, it's really, really bad. So I'm more on the fade side of this. If they get up big, and it's possible, San Francisco, I mean, they haven't won a game. They're not a good team, and we see it in our projections. The one reason why Adrian Peterson's even rating a little bit well, despite not doing much in the passing game at all, is that San Francisco inflates the number of overall plays and particularly rushing plays and rushing touchdowns for opponents just because they're so bad. It's mostly game script related. But you look at this spread, it's only a 1-point spread. So I don't know. I'm on the fade side. I just don't think he's that good anymore. And at 5,600, you need to rush for 100 and a touchdown for a tournament upside. I guess there's a chance he falls into 2 touchdowns because he's going to get those goal line carries 100%. So there's not like no risk in fading him, but he's definitely on my fade side.
Dallas running backs. It's probably time that we talk about them. They're both $5,500. You got Alfred Morris. You got Darren McFadden. I've been big on McFadden. I think that they've been holding him out to make sure that when Zeke goes out, they have a healthy running back now. Jerry Jones has obviously said that Alfred Morris is going to get the carries and Rod Smith's going to be involved. No one's even mentioning McFadden. So when McFadden shows up like inactive on Sunday, I'm going to be like, oh God, what happened? But I think with the pace of this game, the way that you see this game going, Kansas City's going to score points on the other side of the ball and force Dallas to, they're going to run a bit, but they're also going to have to pass a lot. And I think if they're passing, McFadden's going to be the one in the game, not Alfred Morris.
My concern here is that first of all, you have to guess right on which running back, which game script you're going to get. Then even after you guess right, the way that DraftKings price these guys at $5,500, it's not like they're 4K. At $5,500, I mean, you're talking like someone like Lamar Miller, who he knows is starting running backs only 700 more with a massive team total at home. So I see the allure of trying to guess it right and getting a low-owned guy go off in tournaments, but I'm going to let that be somebody else's problem. I think that it might end up being just a mess of a situation where everyone's involved. Maybe you're right, Pat, and you do guess right on Darren McFadden, but there's a chance you guess completely wrong, and it's heavy Alfred Morris, and all of a sudden that hurts your min cash ability in tournaments a lot. I think sometimes people don't think about min cash ability. They're only thinking about hitting this long shot play, and I just don't see the overall massive upside. Like if you're right on McFadden, what's he gonna score that's gonna like really make me regret not using him? Like 18 DraftKings points. I mean, that's a good game, but I'm not gonna cry about it.
Yeah, so it's a situation where if he's not like the highest or second highest guy of the week at running back, then it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, and then at that point, why take on the risk where the downside is really, really significant and really can damage the equity of any of the teams you put him on? That's sort of the way that I'm thinking about it. Like, let that be someone else's problem. It's tough to project as a result that it's tough to project. Like, we have both him and Morris as really negative values on the week. And I do like the game theory. Projections are not perfect by any means, especially in a high variance sport like NFL. But when you start dipping down too much to guys that don't project well, generally they don't project well for a reason. And unless there's something that we're completely missing or some sort of crazy thing that could happen that we're not accounting for, I just rather let other people try and deal with that situation and just take plays that are just more certain, better. And again, it's just unlikely to come back and hurt you.
Like, would Doug Martin be a better play? Because I don't even really like Doug Martin. I can see this being more of a Charles Sims game than a Doug Martin game, and that's what worries me about Doug Martin in this spot.
Yeah, my issue with Tampa Bay, I know like coming in this season they wanted to run a little bit more. And we saw some run-heavy games. We saw one run-heavy game script early in the year. End of last year we saw a few, very heavy run game scripts. The last few weeks, they've thrown that out the window. They're one of the highest pass percentage teams in the league. That's been especially the case the last 3 or 4 weeks. As underdogs against the Saints, I don't see that changing. So I'm really off both of the Tampa Bay running backs. I don't think Sims has gotten as much consistent work in the passing game, at least that I expected coming into the season, to make him a reliable guy. Like, even if you get the right game script, there's a good chance that he disappoints. So I'm off the Tampa Bay running back situation.
All right, of the final guys in that level, we like Carlos Hyde probably the best, especially as a cash play in the low $5,000 area. But you still have Henry and Murray down there. You have Mixon down there. Is there any one of those guys? C.J. Anderson is $4,800 in a tough matchup. Alex Collins. I mean, I don't really love any of these guys. I guess if I had to pick, it would be Mixon. Just in case he ends up with the same market share again, and people perceive this as a really tough matchup for him. But you can kind of run on the Jags, and maybe with Darius now, that's going to kind of shore that up a little bit. But I'm not sold on that.
Yeah, this really is just an ugly group at the running back position. I mean, generally at the running back position, I have a tighter core guys than I do at receiver because the variance isn't as large. That's especially going to be the case this week. So I'm not going to take too many shots on guys like this. I think it's like Mixon or Murray down here if you had to take a chance. I know with Tennessee, randomly sometimes we see DeMarco Murray, all of a sudden it looks like Derrick Henry's catching up to him, and then we get a game where Murray's like 70% of the snaps and the rush attempts. So 5,400 isn't a bad tag for him. But I think it's him or Mixon if you're taking a shot. But I really rather just spread out and take some more shots on expensive guys and go cheaper at like tight end, wide receiver if I have to, in order to get a better mix of those mid-high expensive guys. There's just not much I like under 6K with the exception of Carlos Hyde.
All right, so Carlos Hyde and potentially Buck Allen if you really need to save in cash games.
Yeah, and then I don't mind in tournaments. We talked about Marlon Mack would be a guy that I like to go in tournaments, or taking a shot on Rawls that, this is the week, he's played more snaps. If he just scores one touchdown, he's not going to kill you. That price tag is so cheap. So, but there's not a whole ton outside of that I'm even considering throwing into the tournament mix.
All right, let's switch to wide receivers. DeAndre Hopkins is by far the most expensive receiver, and DeAndre Hopkins and Deshaun Watson won me pretty good money last week. I'm not going to lie to you. That was the perfect sort of spot where just take these high upside players in what's a perceived bad spot and just roll them out. You have to be willing.
That was a somewhat ugly slate. So if you stacked that Houston-Seattle game, you were in great shape. It's funny,
I didn't stack it with Fuller though. I even had Paul Richardson on a team and just didn't use Fuller.
I mean, it was tough because Fuller was like the ultimate good fade, right? Like, this guy's going to stop scoring a touchdown every time he catches the ball, and then he scores 2 more touchdowns.
Yeah.
I think you have to fade the Houston passing game, though. I know against Cleveland, that game where they were big favorites, like Hopkins was close to having like a 2-point performance.
And then he caught the touchdown at the end.
Yeah, they got stuffed too, like once or twice before he caught that touchdown, where if they hadn't gotten stuffed, he would have never gotten it. I mean, I know obviously he ended up getting it and you can't take it off the board, but if the game script goes the way it's projected, like there's some serious downside there. If I was playing anybody on Houston, I just played Deshaun Watson. You've got some rushing upside. If he throws 3 touchdowns, even without a lot of yards, his score is going to be really, really good near the top. Even if he spreads it around, you don't have to worry about that. So from a receiver standpoint, I just think all these guys on Houston are overpriced. I can't imagine playing Will Fuller at his price tag, just given the amount of targets he's getting. Like, that touchdown rate is not sustainable whatsoever. But we've been saying that for a few weeks now, so who knows?
Do you think it's a situation where everyone just kind of looks at it, they see the tightness of the pricing, and they just say, I can't use DeAndre Hopkins. Will Fuller is too pricey, and you just roll out a Texan stack again and no one else has it? Or because,
if I was going to do it, I'd cut out Fuller and do it with Hopkins and just hope that it's really concentrated volume to Hopkins, and maybe just do a solo stack there, or maybe do it with like Ryan Griffin at tight end, or even with like Lamar Miller. I'd cut out Fuller. I'm pretty heavy on a Fuller fade, and I wonder if he still comes with some ownership, because people are like, I can't pay for Hopkins, but I could at least fit Will Fuller in if I want this Houston exposure. So if I was doing that, I'd do it with Hopkins, just because Hopkins has the meaningful upside that you need because of the sheer amount of targets he could receive if the game is somewhat close. But overall, even if Hopkins is low owned, I don't know if I'm all that interested. Just because at 9,200 on a tight pricing DraftKings slate, I mean, you're going to need like 30 points out of him. Like 24 isn't going to cut it in a tournament. So I'd rather go a more balanced approach in GPPs.
Well, the other receiver that's up there, and he has the big red first next to his name playing the Jags. He gets Boye, he gets Jalen Ramsey. I assume Jalen Ramsey would be worse, but it's not going to be a good situation for A.J. Green whatsoever. Is this a spot where I just very much doubt anyone's going to use A.J. Green? Now, is this if you put him in your lineup, is A.J. Green being a smart contrarian play, or is it just a stupid move to do because the upside just isn't there?
It's tough. Like the DraftKings did a good job pricing him at 7,400, where it's like just low enough that there's some appeal. And I know when Pittsburgh played Jacksonville, I took a chance on Antonio Brown, and he had a really good game against them, and it was pretty low owned. But for me, just a 17.5 team total for Cincinnati, and there's a lot of guys in the 7K range that I just like better that I think you really need to run into a huge performance out of him. If this group of 7K, high 6K receivers, if I didn't like as many of the other ones as I do, and I only needed Green to, outperform his projection by 2 or 3 players, I'd be more interested. But I think there's like 4 or 5 guys that he realistically projects behind this week, and that's a tough task to ask for him to do.
All right, so the guys that I like from this sort of $8,000 to $6,000 range, I really do like Mike Evans this week. I know everyone's kind of talking up, New Orleans has Lattimore. He's going to shut everyone down. New Orleans' defense is great. I mean, it's not great. It's just significantly improved from what it was. Mike Evans can still be fine in this game, and I think that there's enough narrative around the Saints' defense that people might be off of him, and if it turns into a situation where they have to pass the ball 50 times, give me Mike Evans. I feel like that's kind of a sensible thing, and I like him more than Michael Thomas for that reason. You spelled it out that the Saints aren't passing as much. 15% market share to both of the running backs is just kind of killing his overall upside when it comes to this. So I like Mike Evans there. I like Doug Baldwin at $6,900. I like Tyreek Hill at $6,700, and I really like Dez at $64.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys here to like. Again, this comes back to why I'm fading A.J. Green. My favorite of the bunch is Doug Baldwin. And I think after last week with Lockett and Richardson and Jimmy Graham having huge games, that hopefully people aren't as on him as they should be. But he's still the guy that's getting the significant target share for Seattle. And 26.5 team total for them against Washington. And the one really good thing about Seattle and why they project really well for us, and this goes back to why I can't trust Rawls in cash games. Like, you want to hope maybe with Rawls in tournament you run into a touchdown. But if you look at their scoring plays this season for Seattle, I'm pulling it up right now, but they've scored 88% of their offensive touchdowns through the air. I mean, that's a significant portion of their touchdowns. I've got the last 3 weeks up here. They've scored all of their touchdowns through the air the last 3 weeks. And is it likely to finish this season quite so high at 88%? No, but I think there's a really good chance that they finish as one of the top 5 teams in highest terms of percentage of touchdowns through the air.
And it's very doubtful that Josh Norman would be shadowing Doug Baldwin because they would just move him to the slot.
Yeah, exactly. They move him around so much. He plays in the slot particularly a lot. So I think that you're going to get him with a huge ceiling he's not going to be low owned, but I don't think he's going to be as high owned as he should be. And I think he's actually the best per dollar wide receiver play on the board. But circling back to some of those other guys you mentioned, I'm still a sucker for Michael Thomas. You listed some very compelling reasons why you would play Evans over Thomas, but the targets have he's still managed to get his targets. It just seems like he can't put it all together in one game. Like, he either scores a touchdown or he goes 7 for 70. Like, he can't put together like a game where he's got a big play where his efficiency is really strong. He's at around when the games he catches 7 balls, he's at like 10 yards a catch, and he's not getting the 100-yard bonus, and he's only scored twice. And he actually did pretty well the 2 games he scored. He's been over 20 DraftKings points. So I think he's a guy that if you look at the game log, you're like, oh, he doesn't have huge upside anymore. And I do think the chance of him hitting the upside is reduced because of the way this New Orleans team has transformed. But I think it's wrong to say he doesn't have that upside. I still think on a given week he could go 7-102. So if people are going to be off of him because they don't think he has upside by looking at the game log, if they're going to play Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara, then I'm still buying in tournaments. And there's always a chance the game script doesn't go as we think it's going to go.
It's true. I just think it'd probably be you're getting a better floor with Evans, at least in my mind, and you probably get more upside with it too. I mean, he hasn't had any fewer than 8 targets in any single game this season. And look, he hasn't necessarily performed in every single game. He has some kind of crappy games as well. But it could be a game where he ends up with 17 targets. Like, with the way, if the Saints jump out to a lead in this game and all they can do is pass, I mean, hell, Ryan Fitzpatrick might end up coming in the game. And usually when he comes in the game, he just focuses on one guy and throws it to him. And if it was me, it would be Mike Evans. So I just feel like the upside is there more. I think they both have probably the same downside, but I just think in a situation I would take the volume with Evans.
And this is anecdotal, but I do feel like Evans just gets his targets no matter whether he's covered by a good cornerback or not. It seems like they force feed him a certain amount of targets, and it goes to the minimum of 8 targets a game. So I do remember like a huge game against Seattle he had last season where people weren't playing him due to matchup. And if there is a position where you're going to ignore matchup and just take talent and opportunity, it is definitely the wide receiver position given the variance there. So you're talking me into some tournament exposure there, but I'm still not going to pay $7,700 for him in cash games.
Yeah, well, I think you could probably just max out at Doug Baldwin and work your way down from there. There's some decent wide receiver values on the board, and that's probably the spot where you have to save this week. But just in terms of ownership, on Friday's show, I do the ownership breakdown comparing the fan share sports tags. It's early in the week, so there's not a lot going on, but Michael Thomas is tied with Dez for most start tags so far this week.
Ooh, wow. I'm surprised by that. Like, if that's the case, then in tournaments, I'm fine fading Michael Thomas if he's going to be like that highly owned. So I'm a little bit surprised by that. The guy that I don't care if he's high owned is the other guy you mentioned there, as Dez. 6,400, good matchup against Kansas City. They've had difficulty against the wide receiver position this season. If you look at 4for4.com, like at just fantasy points per game against, based on the schedule the teams have faced, and Kansas City's allowed the 5th most PPR wide receiver points per game. And we mentioned with Zeke likely suspended, even the team might try and go run heavy with Morris, with Darren McFadden, but they're not going to have the same success. Eventually, you're going to have to let Dak in his second year spread his wings a bit. He has the talent to do it. We've seen him do it before, so I expect a more pass-heavy attack than we've seen in the past from Dallas.
Dez and Cash?
Oh, absolutely.
Baldwin and Cash?
I think both those guys are phenomenal cash game plays, and you can still pay up for an expensive running back with them.
All right, so the guys that are just below them, obviously Kelvin Benjamin, again, he is not going to be on this slate as he was traded to Buffalo. He's still in the system. His name is Red. Do not use him. Just please don't do it. People will. We'll look at we'll export the CVS at the end and look at ownership percentage. He'll be 0.7% owned in the Millionaire Maker for whatever reason, but it just kind of happens. It's like people forget about this stuff or just throw their money away. But if you want to do it and I'm in playing against you, then go all for it. But Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, no word yet on if Sanders is going to play or not. But with Brock Osweiler starting, no. Just even if you think you're getting sneaky, you're getting low ownership, you think you're getting sneaky with DT and Sanders, I would just say no.
Yeah, I'm the same boat. I'm not interested in either of them. At the top of the show, we talked about Devin Funchess benefiting from the Kelvin Benjamin trade.
$5,400, sign me up.
Yeah,
he might get
I'm very into that. I mean, this is a guy that if you use the site playerprofiler.com, that's a pretty cool site to see. If you're like me and you're not a scout from the couch by any means.
You're not an official NFL scout?
No, believe it or not. Sometimes I watch a game and I have no idea what's happening. So you can go to this site to really find out how athletic guys are, how their college production was. And Devin Funchess, he's really young. People forget he had a really strong breakout age in college, high percentage of his team's yards in college. But at 6'4", 232, his 40 time doesn't look that good, but when you adjust it for his height, he's actually in the 87th percentile in a height-adjusted speed score, and their best comp for him is Brandon Marshall. So I just like the red zone ability for Devin Funchess, and then you throw on the floor on the high percentage of targets between the 20s with Benjamin gone.
Well, would you take a shot on Russell Shepard at $3,100 now that he's possibly going to play like 88% of the snaps?
I think in tournaments you could take a shot there just because any receiver that's going to be on the field that often that's that cheap can run into a decent game. But it's not someone in cash games. I know we talked about it being tight, the cap, and there not being a lot of cap relief plays, but I still think as of right now, I'm just, I need to look at that one a little bit more. I'm not sold that that's going to be safe enough in cash.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be safe in cash either, and I might end up using Ed Dixon in a few spots if I want to pay down because it opens up more market share for him as well. But I think that Russell Shepard, people say Curtis Samuel just because of his speed and his big play potential, but I think that Shepard is probably your better bet to not give you a zero, basically, and has upside to go along with it. Like, just because Benjamin is gone doesn't mean Samuel is going to be on the field 100% of the time. He's still going to be playing limited snaps. It's going to be Russell Shepard that's out with Funches. Would you play Funches in cash? Because I think I would.
Yeah, I definitely think he's in the mix for cash games. I don't want to say he's a stone cold lock because there's a few guys in this range that I like. You got T.Y. Hilton at 4,900.
T.Y. Hilton has to be a GPP only play.
I mean, I don't know. He's still getting a high percentage of the team's targets. Like, overall in the season, he's at, he's down to 20%. Yeah, I mean, maybe you're right. I was thinking he was more like still at like a 23-25% guy, but I'm surprised to see him down to like 19% over the last 4 weeks. They did make an indication they needed him to get the ball more, but coaches always say that when their top player's not getting the ball, it doesn't necessarily translate on Sundays. Yeah, maybe he's GPP only, but he's a really good GPP play because if he does get up to that 25% market share, we've seen him with a lot of efficiency, even with Jacoby Brissett at the quarterback position. They're going to be chucking in this game, hopefully down 14. But the other guy, and I want to hear your thoughts because I just seem to get suckered into him.
No to Pierre Garçon.
Yeah.
Patrick Peterson, no.
Woo! Every single week. Yeah, I guess against Peterson, and we probably need to adjust that because our first round of projections, we probably took more of like a macro view because there's only like a few corners that we're really worried about.
He's the one to worry about.
He's one of them. So I probably do need to shift that one around. We're probably too high on his, both his efficiency and his targets because, it's not just that he gets shut down on the targets that he's going to see. He's not going to see as many. So you're probably right. We're probably high on our initial projections there. You know who I feel like can't get a break, though? I feel like Alshon Jeffrey. Every time I look, I want to play him at the price, and he's just in a tough matchup. And against Denver, I think, again, it's going to be useless.
It's funny you say that because Aguilar was super chalky last week at like 5,500 and kind of underperformed. I actually kind of like Aguilar at $4,800 this week with him playing the slot, working over the middle. I think that's where you can really get to Denver. And Denver's pass defense has not been as lights out as people kind of have in their minds.
No, if you're using a receiver against Denver, it's going to be the guy in the slot in the middle of the field because they're so elite on the outside at covering. So you want tight ends, running backs, slot receivers in the middle of the field. But I'm still not interested. 4,800 is a little bit high for him. I think he's another one of those guys where the touchdown percentage on him is a little bit fluky. So I'd rather dip down. I wonder if he'll be chalkier after a good performance. But he didn't have the Paul Richardson 2-touchdown game. But I think I'd take Lockett over Richardson.
I wouldn't play either of them. I just play Baldwin.
In cash games, yes. But in tournaments, I think you can triple stack with Russ again. I think you can double stack.
Why not just use Jimmy Graham then?
I mean, last week there was enough production to go around for three guys.
Well, I don't think they're going to score 40 points every week.
I'm just surprised. Like you look at the targets for Lockett, he's had 15 over the last 2 weeks, 7 and 8 distributed pretty evenly. With his playmaking ability, I mean, you could get him off 5 targets, and you can have the 100-yard bonus and a touchdown. So I like him in tournaments. I think Richardson's going to be the guy who's over-owned because he's scored the 2 touchdowns last week.
One of them runs into Norman. It's going to happen, and I don't know which one it's going to be.
Yeah, but that's why we only play him in a tournament, and now if we're wrong.
Sure, but I mean, I don't want to be taking like zeros out here. There just happens to be other guys that I like in this area. Like Jamison Crowder didn't practice Wednesday with a hamstring problem. That could open up Doxson or, God forbid, Pryor at the bottom here.
Oh my God, Pryor.
But I mean, Jamison Crowder made more sense because he was going to play the slot. If he's out, I think that Ryan Grant actually steps into the slot role, or Vernon Davis is going to be out there running routes as well. And we'll get to Vernon Davis in a second. But I like Sterling Shepard, $5,200. It looks like he's going to be back. Him and Ingram are the only two people on that team that are going to get targets. He's probably going to get double-digit targets. He's $5,200. I mean, yeah, the Rams have a good pass rush, but they're not the greatest pass defense in the world. Like, I just think just through volume alone that Shepard can pay off that price pretty easily.
Yeah, I think it just comes down to how much volume do you think he's going to get. Is he going to be like a 25+% market share targets guy?
Yes.
Because if you think so, then it's a really good play at 5,200. If you still think that, he gets bumped up from like a 17% type guy to like a 22, 23%, which is pretty good. But if you think that's his baseline, I think it's tough. I just don't see the overall upside in the offense to get him there, even with like a solid amount of targets. So I think it just comes down to, what kind of role you think he's going to fit. And I lean a little bit more on the conservative side of things. So I still think Evan Ingram's just going to dominate there. I know you can make the argument that there's enough targets for them both to be 25+ market share guys, but I like Ingram still better there than Shepard.
All right, so the final guys I wanted to talk about receiver, we'll talk about the Rams guys. I like Cooper Kupp the best at $4,500. I know Janoris Jenkins is not going to play, and now all of a sudden my Twitter feed is blown up with Sammy Watkins week. When is it ever a Sammy Watkins week? It happens like twice a year. So like I told Davis this a few weeks ago, and Sammy Watkins is just one of those guys. He's like a Murray Cooper. Either you play him every single week or you never play him. And that way, you don't have to deal with that headache in trying to pick the right spot, because it's never the spot that you think it's going to come in. So I'm just not going to play him. Rather play Cooper Kupp. Jeremy Maclin's $4,000. I thought that was interesting against a really crappy Tennessee secondary. And Marquise Lee is $3,900. And I mentioned Russell Shepard at $31 as well.
Yeah, I think of that bunch, I mean, the Rams situation is really frustrating to figure out, because you've got three guys that, I know when I was doing the projections, they're all like, none of them hit that 20% market share target baseline. They're all between like 16 and 19%. And obviously, week to week, it's not going to be distributed quite so evenly. Like, the baseline might be right, but like on a given week, probably one of those guys is going to be below 15%, and one of them is going to be above 20%. And if you can guess the right guy above 20%, it's going to be a strong matchup for them with Janoris Jenkins out. And I'm with you, though. I've got both Woods and Kupp as better per dollar value plays than Sammy Watkins. Of the cheap guys, I think Maclin is the best guy to take a shot on. And it pains me to say that just because how bad Baltimore has been, how bad Joe Flacco has been. But it's tough to pin down, or it's tough to throw a bad projection on him at this price point. Number one receiver, 20% market share targets, like that's going to get him to a double-digit game more times than not.
Yeah, and if he catches a touchdown, he's 5x super quickly. Yeah,
exactly. And you're just not going to see the Baltimore offense. I don't think they can be much worse than they've been, but who knows?
And this is just assuming Flacco plays. I don't think they've actually come out and said if he's past concussion protocol. I know earlier in the week they said he's trending towards playing, but it could be Mallett back there. But I mean, I would prefer Flacco to Mallett, although I don't think the difference is all that big at this point. But just at $4,000, like, we're not even certain that Mike Wallace is going to play yet.
It's a price play, really, too. Like, you look at that offense, it's tough because they're somewhat run heavy relative to the rest of the league. They do spread their targets around a lot, so it's not like he's getting a ton of targets. It's just he's a good receiver going against a bad defense, and he's 4K. Like, there's not a whole much more to add to that's that prescient. It's that simple.
All right, let's switch to quarterbacks. When we go to the top, we see Deshaun Watson. He is number one. He's $8,100. That's $800 more than Russell Wilson. See, it's tough, man. In a week where it's tough to find savings, it's going to be difficult to afford Deshaun Watson. People will do it for sure, but I don't necessarily think that you need to. I mean, if you miss out on the big game, you miss out on the big game. Then you lose, and that happens. But I think you can find other values that are a bit better, like the guys that I kind of highlighted that I like at quarterback. I'll move my page up a little bit. I mean, Watson's good. Dak, I think I prefer at $6,700. As a tournament play, I kind of like Wentz at $61 because no one's going to use him against Denver. But like I mentioned earlier, like Denver's defense has been giving up passing yards recently. Alex Smith's intriguing. Jared Goff is intriguing at $5,500. And I kind of like Jacoby Brissett if you're going to pay all the way down at $52.
Yeah, you compare him with T.Y. That's a pretty cheap stack there with a significant amount of upside. But in cash games, yeah, I don't think you can go all the way up to Watson. I think if you're gonna pay up in cash games, like just take Russell Wilson.
Or Dak.
I think you've yeah, or like I think Dak's fine. I'm just saying like if you are paying up the price tag, the $800 savings, like objectively, are you really projecting Deshaun Watson for that much higher than Russell Wilson, if at all? Like I don't really see any way the math works out where you're giving him a better game than Russell Wilson, or at least that much better that it's worth spending up an extra $800 on a tight pricing site. Dak and Jameis Winston at 5,800 is interesting to me just because, as I had mentioned before, they've been really, really pass heavy recently. On the season, 65%, but you look at their last 4 games, it's 71%, 67%, 64%, 65%. It's been really consistently there. They run more plays per game than the league average. He obviously has a ton of weapons. I know the New Orleans defense has been better, and some of the concern facing New Orleans is that they turn into like a Dallas type team to a certain extent where they're a little bit more ball control. Their defense can just play mediocre. They can be ball control, run it more with Mark Ingram, not pass as much. But even with all those concerns, between the pass distribution between the 20s and also on the season, 81% of their touchdowns offensively have come through the air. I think it adds up to an underpriced Jameis Winston. I don't know if I could pull the trigger in cash. I'd rather play, I think, Dak Prescott for $900 more, kind of in between Jameis and Russell Wilson, but Jameis is at least on my radar in both formats.
Well, I think that Jameis as a tournament play makes some sense because there's still the injury concern of his shoulder. Dirk Cutter came out and kind of said it that, like, maybe he sits this week. It doesn't look like he's going to sit, but at least that narrative is out there, and I think that it might scare enough people off that, hey, if they get down by 20 in the second quarter, that they're just going to yank him.
Yeah, I'm with you. The only caveat I would say is, as far as the ownership angle, like usually at the quarterback position, ownership's so spread out that I'm not overly concerned about it. So I'm more thinking about like raw ceiling. But I do see 300 yards and 3 touchdowns just because of the way that they attack opposing defenses. But man, I have a tough time getting away from Dak if we get when we get confirmation that Zeke's out. I'm a big Dak truther. All this Carson Wentz talk, give me Dak any day.
Well, what about, right now the most tagged guy on Fanshare Sports at quarterback is Drew Brees, and I think we made a pretty compelling case to not play Drew Brees at this price because the upside might be limited. Not to say that he can't throw for 400 yards and 6 touchdowns because he does that sometimes, but it's looking more and more and more unlikely based on their game plans every single week. What about Alex Smith in that game? Everyone hates using Alex Smith, myself included, but this is a really nice spot for him.
It's so difficult because you always say, oh, well, Alex Smith doesn't have the upside for tournaments, and here he is what? Right, I mean, he's like, what? Is he still the number 1 scorer? I mean, for a while.
I think Deshaun Watson is now.
Yeah, Watson after that huge game. But Dallas is 25th in defensive DVOA. As we talked about on the Dak side of things, they're going to be throwing the ball a bit more, Dallas, which floods over to the opposition a little bit. That can create more plays for the opposition. So, I think it's fine. I mean, we've certainly seen the upside just because the upside from the quarterback position, let's be realistic, it comes from touchdowns. Like, that's the big thing is you want touchdowns. And Kansas City's offense has run really well, really creative by the goal line, and they're getting Alex Smith touchdowns. His efficiency is up, leading to more big plays because they're using Kelsey more. They're using Tyreek Hill more. They have Kareem Hunt in the running game. So the upside's there. I think you'd be a fool to say it's not there, given what we've seen the first 8 weeks of the NFL season. It's still someone that, like, when I go to click his name in, like, a high-stakes 3-max tournament, I just don't know if he makes that cut.
Well, I think that if you're going to use Alex Smith, you kind of just have to go all in with it and do the triple stack and use Kelsey, use Hill, and use Alex Smith and just hope it hits.
And Dez coming back because you're going to want – like, I think if you're using Alex Smith, you're stacking the game.
Yeah. Well, I mean, does it have the highest, like, overall projected total of the week? I think it does. I know that neither one of
it's projected, like, as of right now, I'm seeing it at a pick'em with both teams, a team total like 25.5.
Yeah, the game total itself is 51 that I'm looking at right now. That's the highest of the week. Tampa Bay, New Orleans is second at 50, and then it's Indy and the Texans at 49.5.
And that's all the Texans side of things.
Yeah,
pretty much.
And then the Ravens Tennessee game is off the board. Maybe that'll open up at like 60. Who knows? I'd bet the under on
Yeah. Yeah, those high total Ravens games we always get.
All right, a place to save money this week, theoretically, could be tight end just because there's always cheap guys at tight end. One of them, if you're going to pay down, that I was looking at, we'll try to figure out who we can use in cash games in a second. However, Ed Dixon I brought up earlier without Benjamin around. Ed Dixon has at least 5 targets in each of his past 4 games. He doesn't do a ton with them, but he might get an extra red zone presence without Benjamin around. We talked about how that might filter onto Devin Funches. Well, now the next biggest guy on the team is Ed Dixon. It's going to be tough, but he's only $3,100. He is a way to save money. And the other one, just because the Giants are so bad against tight ends, my guy, Eleanor Higbee. He might be all right. He's like $2,800. Tyler Higbee.
Yeah, he's been surprisingly seen like an uptick in targets over at least the last 4 weeks versus the original 4 weeks. But I like the Dixon play more so because it's a situation where you're coming in with a decent enough floor. As you mentioned, his targets recently 5, 8, 5, and 5. So if nothing changes with Benjamin out, it's not the worst play in the world. But if you're right and he picks up more of the slack, whether it's in the red zone between the 20s or both, it can pay off. The upside is going to be really high. So I think it's a good floor ceiling combination. And as I had mentioned with Christian McCaffrey, I have a tough time seeing like McCaffrey get even more involved in the passing game than he already is. And then same with Funchess, you're just looking at like a higher target share of touchdowns. His overall target share was already been around 25%, maybe it ekes to 28. So it's got to go somewhere. Shepard is going to take some of it, but I do see some of that flooding to Ed Dixon. So I like him at $3,100. I also think Ryan Griffin is interesting at $3,000 as a way to get access to this Houston passing offense without getting, totally screwed if it's a terrible game script and they're running the whole second half, because all you need from him is a touchdown and you're fine.
Well, who do we think are sort of like the lock guys to put in? Ertz is super expensive. He's $6,800. Kelsey's $6,700. It's just going to be difficult to pay up for those guys this week, although Ertz is in a nice spot against Denver.
I think I'm probably on the fade Ertz side of things. That's just too much to pay in cash games at this position.
I think it was Davis who brought it up last week that if Zach Ertz was a receiver, wouldn't he be like $8,500 every week?
No.
You don't think so?
He'd be like $6,800 this week.
He has been awesome every single week.
I know, but
although it's weird, he hasn't scored fewer than 13 points, yet he's never scored more than 20. That's weird. I didn't realize that.
So I think he's priced about right, and you're at a position where you can, one of the few positions where the opportunity cost and taking a cheap guy isn't bad, and it's also like sometimes at receiver when you're with 3K guys, you don't know where the target share is going to end up with these guys. Whereas tight end, we can take cheap tight ends that we know is the number 1 tight end. So there's, in a weird way, there's almost a little bit more uncertainty there, taking like a cheap number 1 tight end over a cheap number 3 wide receiver. So, but Jack Doyle, 14, 7, 11 targets the last 3 games. Another game where they're set up to throw a whole bunch. $4,300. I mean, I would like to get up to Evan Ingram because we mentioned, and when talking about Shepard, that the targets there are going to be really concentrated on those two, and I still think Ingram is the number 1 target getter there. But the $900 savings to Jack Doyle, that seems to fit really well in cash games, in my opinion.
So Jack Doyle at 43 or Vernon Davis at 41?
Yeah, the thing I'm keeping an eye on with Davis is I think he might get like more hype than he deserves if just Reed is out, which he's going to be. But if all of a sudden like Niles Paul, who didn't practice, is out, the backup tight end, that opens up like just a little bit. If Jamison Crowder in particular, he didn't practice Wednesday, if he's out, I think that changes thing. And if Crowder were to be out, Davis, I'd imagine, would be the cash game lock at that point.
But there's not that much. I feel like the touchdown upside is probably higher with Vern than it is with Doyle. But the floor is probably better with Doyle.
I think as it stands right now, if Crowder were to be out, you'd have probably both aspects going in Davis's favor, in which case he'd become the play. But there's some good plays here. Like Jimmy Graham's still only 5K, and he's coming off that huge game.
Well, I was gonna say if we talk about like Jameis and we talk about Evans, why not Brait? Are you really sweating O.J. Howard? Like, he's not really eating into the market share that he gets every single week. It's just when the Bills don't cover him, they throw to him.
Yeah. I was at that game. That was frustrating. wide open touchdowns. But I think there's a bunch of viable tight ends this week. I don't mean to cop out. Like, whereas running back, I was like, there's like 5 or 6 guys I like, right? Tight end, there's like 8 guys I think you can make an argument for. And it's hard because the position can be really touchdown dependent. So it's like, who's going to get the touchdown? And I think Brate's fine, but he's just lower on the list. Like, I've got Watson ahead. I've got Vernon Davis ahead. I've got Dixon ahead. I've got Jimmy Graham ahead. I think he's close to those guys. I don't think it's a huge gap. It's just an order of preference. He falls down the list for me.
All right, let's close this out with defenses. This has been my bread and butter like the past month. It's been saving my ass and basically everything. Cash, GPPs, just hitting a big one. And let's see if we can get another one here. The Jags are the clear play if you can afford them, I think, at $3,800. They're $3,800. It's going to be tough. They're going up against Andy Dalton. That's always a good sign. I think that the lock and load defense that you can use, and maybe everyone's just going to be on it, but I don't even really want to overthink it that much. The Eagles against Denver playing Brock Osweiler. That sounds like a good situation to me.
Yeah, at just $3,300. That's going to be the chalkier cash game play. I do think in tournaments there's a lot of pivots you can make off of that. I like the Rams at $3,100. Eli is someone that will take sacks. He will make some dumb plays and turn it over. Even at home, the Giants are underdogs in that game. And there's just not a lot, even with Sterling Shepard coming back, there's just not a lot to throw to. I just can see them getting in some pretty bad spots where they have to throw, and they just don't have the weapons to do it if they're able to shut down Evan Ingram or even just somewhat contain Evan Ingram. So I like the Rams at $3,100. If you're talking real cheap, the Falcons at $2,600. Cam Newton's had some games this season where he's just looked horrific, taking sacks. The total in that game is surprisingly low, in my opinion. It's only like 43, and it's a pick 'em. So 2,600, I think Atlanta has a good sack upside at that price tag.
Well, the one big thing that I've been doing is taking the top 10 adjusted sack rate DVOA for defensive lines and mixing it with the bottom 10 in terms of offensive lines. And the only one that really comes through this week is Jacksonville. They have the best pass rush, and Cincinnati has like the 5th worst offensive line. So that does make the most sense. I'm going to have exposure to Jacksonville just for the upside. But the pivots that I was looking at, you hit on the Rams at $3,100. I do like them. Denver really intrigues me at $2,600 just because of their pass rush. And as we know, without Jason Peters around, that offensive line is substantially worse and could be susceptible. And Wentz isn't afraid of a few turnovers from time to time. I think he's going to be fine. And there's a situation where they just get up by a bunch and run, and then Denver's defense is no good. I think it's a bit riskier, but I think that's on the table. And then Washington at $2,400. Yes, Dwayne Brown is now with Seattle, but it might take him some time to fit in, and I don't know if he drastically improves their offensive line. Russell Wilson's not afraid to take some sacks, so it's just a defense no one's going to use. I don't like it because Seattle might score a bunch of points, but if Seattle continues to pass as much as they have because they can't run, the Washington defense has been able to get to the quarterback, and I don't mind that as much.
Yeah, and in tournaments too, I mean, we talk about this a lot. When you look at the scoring for defenses, once you get past like 17 points, or even once you get past 14 points, it's not a huge drop off unless you're allowing like 35 plus points, which at that point, like if you picked a defense that's allowed 35 plus points, you're probably not going to win. That's just the way it is. But if you can keep them under 30 points, like the difference is like 2 DraftKings points between 14 allowed and 28 allowed, I think. So at that point, you're just looking at upside. And where does the upside come from? Well, it comes from the other team throwing the ball, because that's when you can get sacks. That's when you can get turnovers. So I like the theory behind the Washington play. I don't know if I'm on it myself, but I do think it's a good week in tournaments to say take some chances on cheap defenses just because the pricing is a bit tighter overall. And I don't love like there's the Rams and the Eagles in that low $3,000 range. I don't love a lot of other mid-tier defenses, which at that point, if I'm getting more exposure past those two, I'd like to just go cheap with the Falcons, maybe Denver, who you mentioned, just because they're good in terms of their pass rush. But we didn't hit on Houston, and I do think Houston, even with the injuries they've had, could contend with Jacksonville as that top defense. And if there's going to be a big ownership disparity in tournaments, I'd rather play Houston than Jacksonville.
Would you play the Texans defense without playing Lamar Miller along with it?
I think you can. Like, that's a nice correlation to have, but it's not.
A must.
I mean, sometimes we go overboard with some of these correlation plays. Like, man, for a while there used to be the kick returner defense correlation that nobody's ever won a tournament on, ever. So I would play Lamar Miller with some Houston, but I wouldn't like feel compelled to force it.
If you have Beathard on one side and Drew Stanton on the other side of the ball, doesn't it feel like one of those defenses is going to get a pick six?
You'd think that would have to happen. That's going to be an ugly game. Let's just cheer for Carlos Hyde checkdowns all game long.
Yeah, I guess the one guy in that game that we didn't hit on was Fitz. Like, I don't think anyone's going to use him, but he's still their number one guy.
Dude, you know what's gross, but like a naked Beathard in tournaments just because he's been running.
But he's so bad.
I know, but like
how much is Beathard?
4,900, I believe.
I would rather just play Brissett at 52. At least he's like competent and he runs.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can't argue too much with you there. I'm just such a sucker for cheap running quarterbacks, dude. It's bad. It's my problem.
And there's no Tyrod to play this week.
I know. No Tyrod on the big slate. No Brett Hundley either, right?
I mean, no Brett Hundley on the main slate. Did you really want to play Brett Hundley anyway?
No comment.
And there's no Kaiser around this week to shove in.
I'm just gonna get. I'm like Dak is the play. I'm just, the more we talk about it, then I get my passing and rushing upside with Dak.
There you go. All right, Mike Leone. Follow him on Twitter at 2hats1mike, and check out all of the content over at dailyroto.com. You got any like giveaways, like promo codes or anything like that, or no?
We do have NBA 17 promo code. 10% off our basketball packages. I don't know how much longer that'll be live, so.
And I know for a while, like, the promo code Mayo would get you 10% off. I don't know if that's still live or not.
I gotta ask Drewby. He's our guy making the promo codes in the back room. I don't know if that one's still active or not. You can try.
It should just always be active.
It probably is. Try Mayo, then we can look and be like, oh, Pat. You know, he's helping us out here a little bit.
There you go. Listen, you guys are my guys. I gotta throw some love towards you.
Well, we love you too. We got the purple shirt to prove it.
Exactly. I mean, after your winnings in NBA and football, and then coming second in the Millionaire Maker at the Masters, I don't think you can be called the poor man's Pat Mayo anymore. You're like the rich man's Pat Mayo.
It's been a fortunate year on the DFS side, but so hopefully it continues. And you know, when I did well at the Masters, I believe I was on your show the week before.
You were.
And that's kind of a thing, the Pat Mayo. I guess not bump. Like, what would you call it?
It is the bump. It's the Pat Mayo experience bump. Ben Raza was the biggest beneficiary of that. He appeared on my show twice last year, and he won $70K plus both weeks. And the week that Al won the Millionaire Maker last year, he was on my show that week.
So I guess I have
it's
to
your week. You're
multi-enter the Million Maker this week.
So I want like a 1% cut of that just for giving you my good luck onto you.
I'll give you 1% if I win the Million Maker.
That'll be like the best cash I've ever had in DFS. Oh, God. All right. You can check out my cheat sheet up at dkplaybook.com. You can subscribe to the Pat Mayo Experience for audio versions on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Podomatic, and Audio Boom for the video version on the DraftKings YouTube page and on the DK Live app, which I recommend that you download for Android or iOS. It's the best way to follow games and stay up to date on your stats. But if you want to do play-by-play, there's videos up there, injury news, everything that you need on the DK Live app. Anyway, I'm Pat Mayo. Good luck in Week 9. I'll see you next time.